friends, we are back again on this channel with a new technology topic. And this time we're going to look at a user interface related technology, which so far we haven't looked at. Of course, I think when we talk about user interface, there are many things. JavaScript is the prominent framework or the technology which is always there. And there are many libraries and frameworks. But we are going to look at a kind of a new kid on the block, Next.js. And to understand the Next.js better, we have with us Prasad.
Hi,
Prasad.
hi everybody. Hi.
Yeah, and I'm Samir. So I think while we kind of try to understand the real role of Next.js here better, I think let's set a ground baseline here. When we talk about a modern web app, right? Typically we understand there is always a user interface layer which customer or end user sees. But behind the scene, definitely there are certain building blocks, right? Like for example, you have to take care of routing or navigation. You have to make sure the rendering is proper and you have the right widgets. Data fetching, obviously, you have to make sure you have efficient data fetching. And a lot of integrations come into the play, maybe for authentication, maybe for payments and things like that. Then there is, of course, the infrastructure. How do you host it on serverless? Do you have edge technologies, CDN, and things like that? And all this has to work perfectly well in terms of the end user. So performance and scalability are two bigger pillars or building blocks of this whole modern web applications. And last but not least, you have to keep in mind the developer experience, because web apps can really grow into big web apps, correct? These are the building blocks. And as we evaluate any technology, including Next.js now, we will have to look at all these building blocks and then understand the technology well. Now, while we go into Next.js, Prasad, my first question is, well, I have so many other frameworks and libraries, especially a library like React, right? Which is so powerful, and there is such a great ecosystem around it. There are a lot of third-party tools and other libraries built on top of React. Why should I look at something like Next.js?
Yeah, fine. I think first thing, as you have rightly mentioned, like React is a JavaScript library. So it is at the lower level to build user interface. And then there are lots of third-party components or libraries which are there, which are part of the React ecosystems, which are used to develop an end-to-end web app. So at the bare minimum, there is just a basic React library to build the user interface. And then there is a huge flourishing ecosystem with third-party tools and solutions which are used to develop a web application. So this is, I think, the biggest advantage of React. So you have a relatively unopinionated library, and then you have given freedom to developers to pick and choose from various third-party components and solutions. But then even if there are these components, still developing an end-to-end web app, it's not a very simple task, even if you have third-party components, solutions, etc. So you need configurations, then you need a lot of other productivity inputs so that your overall developer productivity increases, and also you need some additional components or solution which will overall improve your application. So definitely there is a good ecosystem, but you need something more than that to develop an end-to-end good quality web app. And that's where Next.js comes into picture. So it is nothing but React, but something on the top of that. So it's a framework, not just a library.
Okay. So that's the point. Okay. So if you want to crisply define for our new users in like few lines, if they need to remember what Next.js is, how would you kind of define it?
Yes. So Next.js is a React framework as a simple definition. So it's a React framework. It's not a library. And it gives you various building blocks to create a web application. So simple single line definition, a React framework that gives us a building blocks to create complex web applications. So that's what Next.js is. So it's React only. Only thing is that we have built, or rather Next.js has built on the top of that. And then what one means by Next.js frameworks means everything required for tooling, configuration, etc., or additional structures, features, whatever is needed to develop a web app is included as a part of this Next.js framework. So one can start with a basic React and then slowly or incrementally can adopt Next.js and build a web application using that. So that's what Next.js application is.
So that's what kind of differentiates it kind of from React. But at the same time, you're also using the React underneath anyways when you're building your stuff, right? Your web app.
Yes. So you are going to the next level of toolchain by adopting Next.js.
Okay, perfect. So now if we start comparing against our baseline building blocks of any modern web app, right? And the first and foremost is how do I build my pages and how do I take care of navigation across the pages, routing, right? What is different here? Is there anything special here? Or yeah.
Yes, yes. See, basically in React, typically the navigation is across the React components. So when we develop a React application using React library, then we develop different components and then we use some third-party libraries or maybe other components to provide the routing across these components. So one needs, apart from React library, one needs something more than that. But in case of Next.js, what they have really given is a very simple way of handling the routing and as well as the pages part of it. So any web app has a set of pages. So in case of Next.js, a page gets mapped to a React component. And then there is a folder called as pages. And the moment you copy your React component into that, then it becomes a routable page. So for example, let's say if I write
Okay.
a component like about, so which is going to
Hmm.
display an information about my web app. So I have to just simply create a component about.js, copy it into this pages directory. That's it. Then slash about, then I will be able to access my component. So simple. So just copy a file
Hmm.
and then it is available for you to navigate. You don't have to go and configure any configuration files or define routes or define rules for
Got it.
routing, etc. Fairly,
So
very, very
especially if you
simple.
have if you have a very large web app, I think in React we'll have to go and define so many hundreds of routes and go.
Absolutely,
Then
absolutely.
if the routing changes, you have to go and figure where to change. All this configuration overhead kind of vanishes.
Absolutely taken care.
It's
So
made simple.
definitely
Yeah.
there is a configuration behind the screen, but then
Correct.
here, as far as the end developer is concerned, just copy it and that's it.
Easy
Then it
for
is
developer.
available.
Yeah.
Absolutely, very easy to use it. And I
Okay.
think that's
Yeah.
one of the
Right.
most powerful feature of Next.js.
Got it. Got it. Okay. Okay. Right. So that's a good start. No, first value of Next.js, right?
Yes, yes,
For developers, absolutely. But I think the most effort goes in, when you build your web app is the whole rendering of the pages, right? Construction of the page and putting the right widgets and whatnot, right? And how do you render? How efficiently you can render? Now, Next.js, I believe, has a lot to offer here, right?
yes, yes. See, rendering means what we are really doing is we are converting our data and then converting into something which can be rendered into a browser. So typically it's like an HTML. So you have your data, you process that data, generate those widgets in terms of HTML, and they get displayed in the browser. So now here the key thing is you have a pure data and then you have an HTML, and you need somebody who's going to convert that data into this HTML, which is necessarily the user interface part of it. Now, typically in a simple React app where we are using React library, this rendering or conversion of data to HTML happens at the client side. So everything,
Absolutely.
the entire code which is running on the client side in terms of JavaScript functionality. So it will read the data and convert into appropriate HTML. Then of course there are other things in React which are already there. We are not going to go into details of that. But in a very simpler way, you have a data which will get converted to HTML, and that happens in the browser or in a client side part of it.
Yeah.
But in case of Next.js, we have a couple of more options here. And the first one is static generation or pre-rendering of each and every page which we have. So here, as far as Next.js is concerned, a page is nothing but a React component. So that particular React component, we can render it at the time of build as a pre-rendering. So imagine you have already HTML is already generated, like your static HTML, and which is present. So I'm going to anyway write a code in React component itself. But at the time of building, the Next.js build process will convert that React component into a static HTML kind of thing. And then it will be available for me for rendering. Now, the biggest advantage of this is because I'm doing it at the build time, I have the entire static HTML ready before deployment. And then once I deploy it, then all my search engine optimization algorithms and everything, whatever is required, all those will be able to crawl through my web app and will be able to find out what needs to be indexed and so on and so forth. Now, this is the biggest advantage because if I have a client-side rendering, then I can't use SEO because anyway, I'm going to generate the entire data or I'm going to render the entire thing
Correct.
at the time of in the client itself. So here you have a biggest disadvantage as far as SEO is concerned. So by keeping SEO in place, build time rendering is the most important part. So in advance, you can generate HTML. So that's a very powerful feature. But again, we have to
I mean, it's
remember
a
in mind.
fantastic feature.
Absolutely,
Yeah, because
absolutely.
I think if in absence of this, like you rightly said, SEO is clearly affected, right? Every page is
Yes,
dynamic, nothing can be
yes, yes,
indexed, nothing can be searched. But
absolutely.
here, this is very powerful. Yeah.
Powerful.
So,
And
yeah,
mhm.
good
Yeah,
example
sorry.
of this. What would that be then?
Yeah.
Like where
Actually,
can I
the
use?
good
Yeah.
example is maybe from an e-commerce point of view. If you think of that, then let's say product catalog. So product catalog is going to be
Hmm.
relatively stable. I will not say absolutely static, but relatively stable. It may
Correct.
change at a regular interval, but then I can generate my catalog and then as an HTML at the time of build, and those files will be available to me as a static HTML. So each page of my catalog we can generate it and keep it at the time of build, and that will
Hmm.
not only will become search engine friendly, but also it will be much more performant, because then
Correct.
I don't have to keep all those generated files only at the origin server, but it can be at the CDN, or it can also be at the edge. So it also helps in improving my performance of application. So that's
Okay.
a classic use case for that.
Hmm.
And then if
Yeah,
your
but
catalog changes, you can always regenerate
hmm.
that.
Yeah, and that was my next question, really speaking. That, I mean, like you rightly said, a product catalog won't change every second, but maybe it changes. You want to update it every 2 days or 3 days. Now, what do I do? That's always a challenge. If I do
Yes,
it,
that's true.
if I have to handle this myself. But
Absolutely, absolutely. See, one doesn't have to rebuild the entire thing again. So let's say maybe there are thousands of pages, then you don't have to regenerate the entire 1,000 pages. You can only do a partial regeneration using Next.js features. So only thing which is changed. So maybe you know that a certain part of data is changed, then only that partial files need to be regenerated. So that is the biggest advantage of this Next.js feature. So maybe at the build time, at the first, you may have to generate the whole thing, but as you move ahead,
correct.
so it's like a cache. So you generate it, cache it,
Yeah.
and if a cache gets expired, then you need to again regenerate the cache part of it. So the concept is exactly
Hmm.
same, and that is
Okay,
possible
all right.
partially. That's the biggest advantage
Okay.
of using
Great
Next.js.
advantage, yeah, because they have thought through this, because you will need this incremental stuff
Absolutely,
anyways,
absolutely,
after
absolutely.
certain frequency. Fantastic.
Yes,
I mean,
yes,
if I have to imagine doing this myself using a JavaScript and Node.js or Java or any other technology, this will be a nightmare, right? The whole process,
absolutely, absolutely,
building it ground up is a nightmare. So that is
absolutely.
what they have attacked.
Absolutely. And
Okay,
it's like typically like an
fantastic.
infrastructure kind of code. So you have to, again, if any bug comes, then you have to go on fixing them rather than fixing
Correct.
your actual business logic bugs, actually. So that's a great advantage of using Next.js.
Hmm. Okay, so this is one approach.
Yeah.
Any such interesting stuff there
Yes,
other
there
than
is a
this?
one more part
Yeah.
is there. See, typically what we talked about is like a server side generation, but at the time of build. So I'm generating
Right.
my rendering component on the server side, but at the time of build. So second
Yeah.
option which we have is, again, yes, we can also it also generates or renders component on the server side, but it is for every request. So for every request which is going to come to my web app, then I will generate my HTML from my component. Now, this is very similar to
Right.
what we used to have for our PHPs and JSPs or ASP.NET kind of environment, like server-side pages. So
Server
for
side.
every
Yeah.
request, I will generate a page and send it back. So this is very also useful for certain parts where your data is likely to change. So for example, let's say in an e-commerce kind of thing, if you want to display a logged in user's orders, then maybe order status is quite likely to change at a regular interval. So here,
Yeah.
there is no point in caching and static generation of those order pages. So what I can do that
Correct.
is I can write it as a server-side page. So if anybody accesses that page, will generate or render it every time the request comes, and the data will be sent back to the client side. So this is like for every request we are rendering a page. So it's a second type of server-side generation.
So, right. So here the advantage probably is that I can make use of the server side power, and instead of doing too much back and forth of a data right there, use the data right there available and generate it pretty fast, and then
Absolutely, absolutely,
spew out the HTML, the UI stuff
absolutely,
only basically.
absolutely.
Okay.
And then
Okay.
also one
Interesting.
more thing, what you can do that if suppose there is you are
Uh,
accessing some data and where the endpoint you don't want to expose it to the client side. So because if I have a client side
yeah.
component and if I'm making an API call, that endpoint is visible all the way up to the browser. But here in case of server side generation, then you really don't know, like because you're doing it at the server side. So I may consume an API,
Yeah.
get the data, render it, and send it back. So all my
Yeah.
sensitive maybe endpoint or maybe some API keys, all those things are always going to remain on the server. So for such sensitive things, I think this is an excellent approach.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. This is nice too. And then I'm assuming the traditional approach of doing everything in the React component by making a call it must be there anyways.
Absolutely, that is
That's de
very much
facto.
there.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
typically, just to quickly summarize, like if I'm developing a Next.js application, so ideally, I think one should classify your web app pages into these three different categories at a very broad level. So first thing should be, if it is possible to do a build time or pre-rendering of page, that should be given a priority. Then you have to go to the next level. If there is any sensitive data or for every request you have to generate, then go for server side rendering for every request. And the third one is client side, where you need the data which is likely to change very frequently, maybe for a
Very
particular
frequently.
user, let's say a dashboard,
Yeah.
or maybe let's say in case of e-commerce, I'm showing how my delivery is happening on the map where it is getting displayed. All those things
Correct.
require a lot of interaction. So there, it is better to do it on the client side. So
Right.
one can have a look at the different use cases and then implement it in this particular manner. So having it
Yeah.
on the pre-generated will definitely improve the performance and the scalability part.
Yeah, but business requirement to the actual end user, I mean, the UI processing requirement, you have to balance these
Absolutely,
design
you have to
choices among
balance.
them.
Yes,
Essentially,
yes,
you have to balance
absolutely,
that. Okay.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So while you're talking about that, I had another question in mind that fine, I have so many components and sometimes the UI components and they are showing something. So there is a state. But if I make small changes in my code, right, in agile days, in today's agile world, each developer makes small change and releases it. How is it handled very well by Next.js? Or the whole application, everything has to be reloaded and recached, and the whole application has to be kind of re-rendered. How is that handled? Because that's a complex stuff
Yes,
again,
yes,
right?
that's a complex, and then there is an excellent feature in Next.js to
Hmm.
handle this. In fact, that's where key power of Next.js or how it works that comes into play. See, but there is one thing which is called as fast refresh. So if you have a collection of components as a part of Next.js JS app, so even if I change only one or two components, then only that will get refreshed. So I don't have to build the whole application. And the beauty of that is the state is also retained. So without losing a component state, I can simply update only a part of my application. So only a certain components which are going to get changed, only they will get refreshed in a very fast manner. So without maybe even end user realizing that something has changed. So that's a very powerful part of
That is good. Yeah.
React.
So I
So this is
don't lose
called
my
fast
data
recovery.
in transit data, or I'm doing some interactions, shopping cart, this that, and that's my state.
Absolutely,
And what you are
absolutely,
saying is that
absolutely.
Next.js promises that state is not lost
Yes,
if
yes.
some other part of the application has changed, right? Effectively. So yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. And of
Okay.
course, one has to take care of certain things, but then if you design it
Yeah.
properly, then you can
Right.
have fast refresh without losing the component state. That is very much possible in Next.js. Yes. And
Okay.
then
Okay.
another thing which, as you are rightly touch, is about the whole application is not part of one large bundle which is going to go to the client side. So
That's what I was thinking, because my application tends to be large and I have so many files, CSS, images, and whatnot, right? And then how is this managed? Is what you are trying to talk
absolutely,
about, right?
absolutely. Absolutely. So
Yeah.
that's where there is a another power of Next.js comes into play. So instead of having a large bundle of a single application, your application is split into multiple small micro apps. If I have to use that particular word, so every page
Correct.
is like a different entry point to our Next.js app, and then whatever is required for that particular page, that gets bundled, and then that gets minified and then sent back to the client side. So that gives the sort of the whole thing becomes much faster because the bundle size becomes small, so network traffic reduces, and the dependency is also less across multiple components. So it really helps to split the application into multiple bundles, and the loading also increases, and management of code is also becomes easier. And all that thing,
Okay.
something happens at the Next.js level. As a developer, one doesn't have to worry about that. For you, it's just a one large
Okay.
application. Next.js will take care of that. I think that is the most
Okay, so I don't,
powerful.
I don't have to use any other tools, maybe Webpack or something like that to manage all
Absolutely,
this
absolutely.
myself through command line is what you're
Yes,
saying.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. So you don't have
Yeah.
to use like tools like Webpack or Babel for generation of
Hmm.
HTML or rendering. That is everything is
Right.
happening under the hood. So whole thing
Okay.
is taken care by
Interesting.
Next.js. So that's a really very very important feature.
Okay, okay, fine. So among the blocks, I think we have covered the most. One thing that comes to my mind is so far we have talked about the UI side of things, but there is also the API or endpoints which we expose through our web app, right? How are they handled in Next.js? Anything
Yes, yes.
interesting there? Yeah.
Yes. So typically, let's say if I'm developing a pure play React application using React library, then it's just a user
Yeah.
interface part of it. But then I will
Right.
need something like Express or similar to develop my APIs. So in case of
Yeah.
Next.js, I don't have to go and use any other third-party framework or a component to develop my API parts. So like we have seen pages folder, there is a folder called as API folder. So I can simply create an API folder, and then whatever I'm going to copy my component inside that is accessible like an API. So it's like instead of slash pages slash component, you have slash API, and then
Hmm.
you can have your API code inside that. So your API code also becomes part of the overall Next.js application. So this becomes very
Hmm.
powerful because there are two things. One is you are able to manage the code within the same web app part. So whatever
Yeah.
the API which is required for your web app is there within your same project. And then key
Right.
other advantage is that you can hide the underlying APIs. So through these, I may just expose APIs from my own web app, and inside that I may be consuming some other third party APIs which I'm really hiding it. So tomorrow if I'm,
Yeah.
let's say I'm using a delivery service, and if that API I'm calling through my web app, so for some reason if that delivery service changes, then I don't have to change the entire endpoint of the my API. So internally I can simply change it and live with my API. So all like an API wrapper. So all those things I can do that. So this is also a very very powerful feature. So like page routes, you
Okay.
can have an
Okay.
API routes also
API
in
routes. Okay.
Next.js.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And
If you
again,
look at
it
it,
doesn't
yeah.
send the code to the client side, so the it remains on the
Uh,
server side. That is another
on the
biggest
server. So
advantage.
that is important. That is a server side code essentially
Yes, yes,
by
it is running
definition.
on the server
Right.
side. Yeah, like an
Right.
API. It is
Right.
not going on the client side.
Hmm. Okay. So interesting. I think if you look at it from end-to-end perspective, the whole modern web app wise, I think there's a lot to offer for Next.js, right? Effectively. So that's very good. And friends, I think I'm sure this will interest you in that. But of course, as always, we have certain points or certain things which you must keep in mind if you're trying to adopt Next.js. And Prasad, you can tell us what those are as is always.
Yes. So let me
Yeah.
quickly summarize. So first thing is many times people ask you, fine, okay, it's great features as far as Next.js framework is concerned, but I have already some code which is running in my React app. So what I should do? Should I migrate my entire application? So the answer to that, there is no need. It is possible to migrate existing React application in an incremental manner. So your existing React code will work without any problem, and slowly you can go and adopt. So that's first important point which is there. Second thing which we have to remember is it's very powerful, but one key thing is you may get locked in to the Next.js framework because we are going to use
Correct.
features of Next.js, and then there is a good possibility that you may not get freedom to change. In fact, the advantage of pure React.js which we had got, maybe we are losing
Yeah.
it here because we are getting the power of Next.js. So that's the key thing which we have to keep in mind. Then,
Right.
of course, there are lots of features, but it's an continuously Next.js people are adding new features. But then there are improvements required in routings, layouts, etc. But I think it's a very fast developing framework. So I'm sure lots of things will come as we move ahead. So that's one thing we have to keep in mind is before adopting that, see that all different kind of routing, whatever is required for a web app is provided by Next.js or not. Otherwise, we may end up into, or we may stuck up into some use case where it is not possible to do it. So that's key thing
Right.
which one has to keep in mind.
Keep in mind.
Then
Okay.
next important thing is Next.js needs server to run. So either you have to deploy it on a serverless framework or maybe your own server. And Next.js recommends Vercel as its own cloud, so which is recommended. But then you don't have to use that. You can deploy it on your own Docker inside your own Docker image on a server as well. So these are the key important things. And there are other things which you can keep in mind is there are lots of other features like image optimization, fonts, and they are there. But it's up to you whether you want to use it or not. But they are
Got it.
very powerful
Got it.
features.
Yeah. Okay. Fantastic. I think a great summary of both what Next.js really can do and where we can use them versus what are the things to keep in mind. Thanks, Prasad, for that. And this is definitely Next.js is definitely technology to watch out for and adapt as needed essentially. So we hope viewers you kind of like this short session, and there will be usual set of resources which we will provide in the description. So do stay tuned, do subscribe to it, and do like our video and do share it. Right, Prasad? Anything
Yes,
else to
sure,
add?
sure. Yes.
Right, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very
Okay.
much for
Thank you very
for
much.
doing
Yeah.
this.
Bye
Thanks.
bye.